Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh Renaissance Fencing Academy here with the next video in our series about Capoferro's Italian rapier system from the early 1600s. Today's quite a technical topic. We're going to cover preparing for an attack, and we'll look at it from the point of view of the attacker, who's going to perform the action of gaining the sword, and we'll look at it from the point of view of the defender, who's going to perform the action called freeing the sword or extracting the sword. First thing I should note is that the preparing for an attack phase or step is extremely important in good tactical fencing. If you just go straight from maneuvering around your opponent into launching an attack without considering what the opponent's weapon is doing first, this is extremely dangerous, particularly with thrust-oriented fencing. There's a very big danger of a double hit where the two fencers mutually thrust each other in a chaotic exchange. And in the context of a real fight with sharp weapons, this is obviously a disaster. There is no point in hitting your opponent if you are killed in the process. So, before we can launch our attack at the opponent, we have to take account of their sword, which they're going to be holding rather, pointed directly at us, threatening us with the tip. So, it's necessary for the attacker to gain the sword of the opponent, and we gain the sword by maneuvering ourselves so that the forte, the strong section of our blade, and the hilt to which it's attached, are covering the debole, the weak of the opponent's blade, and in particular the tip, which is the dangerous thing, the thing that's threatening us. This cover is almost like a preemptive defense, because it means when we finally launch our attack, our sword is going to be able to push or power its way through the weak of the opponent's blade, displacing their tip off to the side during our own attack, which means we are protected from the danger of the opponent's point coming straight at us. Effectively, we gain the tactical upper hand by gaining the sword of the opponent first. In a simple way, the gain of the sword is performed by advancing the forte so that it opposes, crosses over, or covers the tip of our opponent's sword. How do we advance the forte? We can do it in two ways. We can do it by taking a step, or we can do it by changing our posture, or we can do both at the same time. Okay, so I'll just quickly demonstrate what I mean. If I'm in our standard terza guardia, third guard, which is a defensive posture that we usually start about in, I can simply take a small, cautious, advancing step forward, like so, and of course this moves our hilt and our forte forwards. If our opponent doesn't move, then we will have more or less gained their sword at that point. There's a little bit more to it than this. You do need to take account of the angulation of your tip relative to the opponent's, but that's something you need to learn with a partner. Okay, so we can basically gain the sword by taking the advancing step. However, if I'm in a defensive posture, like terza, and I change into an offensive posture like quarta, this also advances the hilt and the forte. Now when I do this, I'm not moving my weight's still on my back leg, I'm just changing the posture of my torso, and obviously the alignment of my hand. And the same thing happens when I move into seconda on the other line. So when we're at wide measure, the maximum possible distance for a fight, taking any of these actions will gain the opponent's sword a little bit. Okay, so I take a step forwards, an advancing step, I gain the sword a little bit. If I change from terza to quarta posture, I gain the sword a little bit. Or alternatively, I change from terza to seconda posture, and I gain the sword a little bit. However, there are degrees of gaining the sword. You could cover the sword a little bit and that's okay, but if you cover their sword more, that's better, it's more secure. So you can combine the step and the posture change into a single action. Again, facing this way, I simply step as an advance with the front foot, and simultaneously, as the foot's moving, I change posture. And that will give me a very solid, deep gain. Reset, and here's the same action using the seconda stance at the end. So a simple training exercise, facing the camera this time, is just to practice stepping and changing posture. Start in terza, advance with the front foot and change into seconda, for example. Reset, quarta, reset, seconda, quarta, and so on. So that's a little drill that you can easily practice by yourself. So the opponent obviously is not going to be happy about this situation. If their weapon has been tactically dominated by a gain, as we just described, then they're going to need to do something about it. They could just run away and break measure, which is good in an emergency, but it doesn't gain you anything tactically, so in the long run it's not that useful. They could just stand their ground and wait for an attack to happen, hoping to parry the sword of their opponent, which is okay, but it does run the risk of being hit by the attack, of course. So the best option is, if you notice the gain in time, you can respond by freeing your sword before the opponent is able to launch their attack. This action of freeing the sword is called a cavazione in Italian, which very roughly translates as an extraction, but I'll use the term freeing the sword because it sounds a little bit better in English. Capoferro says that the freeing the sword action is basically the direct opposite of gaining the sword. The gain is done with the attacker coming forwards, so the freeing is done with the defender shifting backwards, pulling or extracting or freeing their sword in a backwards direction. This can be done with a step, but as much as possible to make it an efficient action, you should do it with the waist. So it'll look a little bit like this. From terza guardia, the opponent gains the sword and you shift your weight even more fully onto the back leg, dip the tip of your sword, angle it to the opposite side of the opponent's blade, and then come out of the cavazione into one of the offensive postures, for example, seconda in this case. So we're not just freeing our sword to a neutral position, we're turning the tables on the opponent and gaining his sword immediately after we've freed our own. So we're in terza, we shift the weight back by moving the waist, and then we come up on the other side of the blade into quarta. If necessary, you could accompany those cavazioni, those extractions or freeings, with a step, probably with the back leg. Step back to free the sword and then up into seconda. Step back and free the sword and up into quarta. So you can see that these two actions mirror each other effectively, and you could get into a kind of preliminary battle for position with your opponent without any attacks or parries being launched, but with the two fencers shifting their weight and their sword forwards and backwards, trying to gain a sufficiently strong opposition to the opponent's blade to then make the killing move and launch the attack finally. So to combine all of this together, here's a nice little drill. Start in terza, take a step forwards and change into quarta, change back to terza, free the sword and come up into seconda. And then reset the exercise, back to terza, take a step, go into seconda, return to terza, free the sword, come up into quarta. So you can start to just chain all these movements together. pulling your weight forwards and backwards, maneuvering the sword between a defensive and an offensive posture, freeing and gaining the blade as necessary. The key to this is fluid controlled body movement, which comes from the vita, the waist, which is being subtly shifted around with the back leg. The sword arm remains relatively relaxed, so with a little bend in it, and minimal sword movements. All we're doing is we're just dipping the tip enough to literally free it from the domination of the opponent's blades. That's it. It's just drawing a little V in the air with the tip of our sword. Do not stick the arm out to gain the sword. You're just going to tire your own arm out. Do not collapse the arm in order to free your sword. This is a very constrained and not particularly useful position. So keep the arm extended, free, gain, free, gain, free, gain, free, gain, free, gain, free, gain. Okay, so that's actually just a static version without footwork of the exercise I just showed. So you can mix those up. Maybe it's easiest to start with the static version and then add in advancing and retreating footwork to build the complete picture. That's it for today. It's quite a complex topic. As I said earlier, it is actually best trained with a partner so you can see the different angles that the two blades take with each other. But if you're looking for a good solo exercise just to build up your sword handling skills and tactical awareness for Capoferro, then this is it. This is one of the key things to study to understand the system. So I'll finish there for today. Just remember, when you're practicing, good body mechanics always makes for good martial arts training. So this body mechanic is focused on the waist and the back leg, particularly the vita, the waist. And on that note, that's it. I'll return shortly with the next video in our series. Until then, take care everyone. See you soon.